Hello, hi, what's up? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and today's January 1st, and that means it would be rude of me if I didn't wish you a Happy New Year. And I'm excited to talk to you about my top 10 best reads of 2024. This normally is a video that gives me a lot of anxiety and tension because I do feel it is my prerogative as a woman to be fickle and to change my mind. And yes, I've assembled 15 books, 5 honorable mentions, 10 awesome reads, but I don't know, ask me in 2 days from now, and I might be like, yeah, that list was whack. Here's some other books that I also really enjoyed. Anyways, all of that to say, this is fun, but also stressful. And I have read a total of 125 books in in the year. Of those, 66% of them were fiction, the other 34% were nonfiction. And according to Storygraph, the top 3 moods of my reading are reflective, emotional, dark. The top 5 genres, if you would be lit fic, contemporary fiction, history, biography, and historical. Now, taking into account all that was said, I do want to add a little bit more detail in case you've never come across my channel. A lot of the books that I enjoy, the ones that speak to me the most, are books that ask the question, what constitutes a life well led? And we look at a protagonist and they are going about their life, they have a different set of circumstances, and they're really grappling with that question. And so a lot of the books that I've chosen do deal with that question in some capacity. And then some of the other books are just naturally books that really spoke to me, engaged me. I thought they were really fun and exciting. These were books that I read and they made me say, I love reading. And thankfully, that is something that I said quite a bit in the year of 2024. The final note I want to say is that there were some of these books that also sparked, individual videos or also, more in-depth analysis through my newsletter. If you're interested in my newsletter, you can find the little link to subscribe in the show notes. Now, my top 5 honorable mentions in no particular order. We have B as in Beirut. This is translated fiction that is looking at 4 different women's experiences in the civil war in Lebanon, and these women are grappling with sexuality and independence and just really dealing with the trauma of undergoing such a monumental experience. There's some really beautiful passages in here. Then we have James by Percival Everett, which is a retelling of Huck Finn through Jim's perspective, and this is incredibly charged, very compulsive, and was something that I enjoyed quite a bit. Next up, we have All Fours by Miranda July. This is a book that I read in Paris. I spoke about it in my Paris vlog. I will always think of this book and how I was at a restaurant in Paris, just eating my little grapefruit appetizer situation and dealing with some of the more provocative scenes in this book and just laughing and giggling, and the waitress had to ask me what this book was about. But if you're wondering what this book is about, this is the story of a protagonist who is unnamed but an artist, so and she is coming to grips with her sexuality and aging and dealing with perimenopause and the changing nature of life. Then we have Brat by Gabriel Smith. This is sort of autofiction, but very short, snappy sentences that are quite pared back. But this is formally really interesting because you have a screenplay, you have short fiction. It's really innovative and also just a bit provocative in some of the humor, but this is a look at a young guy who is grappling with the death of his father, the possible sale of his family's house, and dealing with grief. This is really a novel that deals with grief quite a bit. And then the final book in my honorable mentions would be Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. This is a book that I had the pleasure of buddy reading with Pedro and Yahaira from Plek, and in Butcher's Crossing, we're looking at this young man who's from Harvard, decides to forgo his final year and goes out west to see nature, to see what's out there, to really live life. And he embarks on an expedition with 3 other men, and they are hunting bison. And you see the way in which this act of violence changes them. And what's also interesting in this book is the way in which nature is such a big sort of character in this book. Okay. those are my top 5 honorable mentions. Now we're going to go on to the top 10 best books ever. And I would have to say, I've put them in somewhat of an order, but I don't know if I can, I don't know how do I talk about them, but whatever. Like, I need to get over it. It's not that deep. The 10th book that we're going to talk about is Binstead Safari by Rachell Ingalls. Now, I think most people would say Mrs. Caliban is the stronger work. I read Mrs. Caliban after reading this, and I think I found this one to be a lot more fun and very exciting. But anyways, this tells a story of a married couple from America. I think this is like the 60s, 70s, and they are going on to a little excursion. They're going on a safari, but their trip starts off in London, where Millie and her husband are doing their own thing, and Millie is walking the streets of London, and she happens to come across her face in a window and is startled. She's looking at herself and she's like, is this who I am? This isn't who I am. And so she goes on a little makeover. She gets a haircut, new clothes. She starts going to the theater. She's going to all these exhibitions, and she's really cultivating cultivating herself and becoming who she's meant to be. And then her and her husband go to Africa, and what's brilliant about this book is that we get both perspectives. So we get the wife's perspective and then also the husband's perspective, and you see the ways in which he is noticing how there's been a shift in Millie and people are responding differently to her. She's so charismatic, she's so compelling, and everyone loves her, and he just doesn't understand. And while this is happening, Millie is also, she's found the love of her life, and there's this kind of almost fantastical quality to this book because the love of her life is somehow has some sort of magical properties. They're not really explained, and I think that's kind of a testament to Rachell Ingalls, that she just drops this in but doesn't really explore it. It's just this added element, and you're seeing this journey, and you're coming across other couples, and this provides an opportunity for the reader, Millie, and the author to all contemplate marriage and what this system really means for women and for men, but primarily women. Rachell Ingalls is an author who's known for having protagonists who are in unhappy marriages and really dealing with that and kind of contemplating happiness and how does one find that. Often in her books, it is through another man, but there is a way in which these books are not very happy, but they're quite compelling. And so hopefully I've convinced you to pick this book up. So the next book that we're going to talk about is The Extinction of Irena by Jennifer Croft. Jennifer Croft is a translator, and this is her debut novel, and this is just a very fun book. It is basically the story of 13 translators who've gone off into a remote area of Poland, and they are on a retreat with their beloved author who's so brilliant and just charismatic and magical, and they're editing, or translating rather, her newest work. And very early into this trip, their author goes missing, and these guys spiral. It sets them off on a journey, and they do not do normal things. They don't call the police once to be like, hey, we can't find so-and-so, this most notable author who will probably get what is that big award? A Nobel Prize, like, we don't know where she is, please help us. They don't do that. Instead, they put up a shrine to her. They have this weird Halloween party. They go on hikes. They are embarking in romantic relationships. It is a book that is very funny, but at the same time that I'm saying it is very funny, there are also jokes in here that are not for me. There are jokes that are for other translators or for other people. There definitely are like some humorous things that went over my head, but there's a lot happening, and it's just very funny, and also funny in the quirky sense, like absurd. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this book. It was something that I talked about for a long time. The next book that I'm going to talk about is a book that is not for everyone. It is If Only by Vigdis Hjorth. This is a very intense book. Vigdis Hjorth puts us into the perspective of a woman who, I think her name is Ingrid, maybe? I might have made that up. But she is, when we meet her, she's like 31 years old, she's married, and she writes in her journal, like, I'm waiting for the heartbreak that will change my life. And when she's on some conference, she meets this man, and she's just like, him. That's the guy. They have a one-night stand, and she becomes quite attached to this man and is of the belief that they will get together. She divorces her husband, and this sets her off on like a 10-year-long odyssey where in the first 2 to 3 years, her and this man are not together, but then they do get together and you see their relationship. And there is a very telling line in the novel, which is their tragedy is not that they couldn't be together. Their tragedy was that they were together. And this book like looks at their relationship and really sees the way in which romance can really derail your life, though both of these individuals have been married, have children, have careers. There is a way in which their romantic relationship trumps everything else. And they also are going about and destroying each other. They are actively engaging in destructive patterns and they seem unable to break part of them. Most people don't like them. Them as a couple, their children don't like them, their coworkers, colleagues, family members. You know, it's a messy situation, but I found myself really, this is the kind of book that you cannot take breaks from it, because the fact of the matter is that this is a 10-year-long relationship and it does not like end, and it is quite bad. You can't like take a break. You need to sit down in one weekend, one day, and just get through the whole thing. And in that regards, I think some people didn't like it because there's not much plot. Nothing really happens. They're just mining these emotions, and there's a way in which I think this really does mirror how these relationships can be for people, where they're very all-consuming. It's the same shit over and over again, and as an outsider, you're able to be like, what are you doing? Just get out of it. But when you're in these situations, it's hard to leave. And so in that regards, I give this, for me, it had a lot of leeway, and I was able to just, ride with it, and it was like, just something kind of gossipy about it, or just like to see someone else experience this and just enjoy it without having to deal with the actual repercussions of a situation like this. That's that novel. I'm not sure if I entirely sold you on it, but Vigdis Hjorth is an author who I read a lot of her work last year, and it kind of set me off on this journey to read some of her interviews, to listen to podcasts with her, and to read about like Norwegian literature and why is it that it's having such a moment. Why am I drawn to it? And that was an interesting little personal project that I embarked on. I would have to say, if you're new to Vigdis Hjorth, the novel I would start with is Mother Dead? And, I do have to preface that If Only is not for everyone. I read it, I had a blast, but your mileage really may vary on that one. Having spoken about If Only, that kind of leads me to my next book, and I do think that If Only and this book I'm just about to talk about, they go in dialogue together. They are two books that could be read back to back. It would be very intense, but they're looking at relationships and their very messy qualities. The book that I want to talk about is Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck. This was also the last year's International Booker winner. So this book is looking at an age gap relationship in East Berlin in the 80s when the wall is still up, and it is the relationship between a man in his 50s and this woman who's like 21. The writing here is really good in the sense that the author will often like switch points of view within the same sentence, and it's quite mesmerizing. I don't know, I just was really drawn to it. But this book is looking at this relationship, and in the background is what's happening in East and West Germany. And you could say that you might want more of that like sort of context, and to really see the ways in which this divide was affecting the society. That is quite subtle, but there is a way in which this relationship is acting as a sort of larger metaphor to really explore the divide between East and West. The next book we're going to talk about is a book that I read, my final book that I read in 2024, and it is for that reason that I hold off on posting my 2024 best books, whatever, because I stay reading January 1st till December 31st. This girl is a reader. And the book that I read, we could say that there's a little bit of recency bias here, but whatever, it is what it is. This is not like a scientific thing that I'm doing, but the book that I want to talk about is Beauty and Sadness. This is translated from Japanese. I think it was originally published in 1964, 1970, something like that. This tells the story of Oki, who is a writer in his 50s, and he is contemplating at what age does one retire when they are a writer, really looking back at his back catalog and contemplating art. And he's also really thinking about one of his former flames. When he was 30 years old, he had an extramarital affair with a 16-year-old, and she got pregnant and things happened, but they ended up not talking for some years, and he decides to get back in touch with her. She is now in her 30s. She is an accomplished painter, but she is neither married nor connected in any strong capacity to anyone. She has always stayed single, but now that she's in her 30s, she has a young protege who is this startlingly beautiful young woman of 19 years old that everyone is just almost terrified of her beauty, and she's quite otherworldly and very feisty, and she decides that she wants to get revenge on Oki and his family for the pain they caused the painter. And this book is really interesting in that, though those are like the plot points, formally we only really have about 5 or 6 chapters where things are very contained, and you'll see like very like small moments. But this book takes place in almost about a year, and or maybe 6 months if that, and it starts on, and this is why I'm so glad I read it, because I literally started it on the day that the book actually starts, or rather, you get what I'm saying? So there's a line here on the first page. It was the 29th of December. Oki was going to Kyoto to hear the New Year's Eve bells. And I was just like, whoa, so good I started this on the 29th, and I then finished it on the 30th. But this book is looking at these relationships, but at the same time, there is a lot of sadness in this book, hence the title, and it made me incredibly sad. This book is contemplating romantic relationships, but also art. And there are moments where the characters will say something like, I couldn't break apart a family. And someone else says, but wasn't art greater than your family? And couldn't art break apart a family? And then there's other moments where the narrator, where the painter says, I'm so glad, because what also happened, I didn't tell you guys this, sorry. Oki wrote a novel about this relationship, and this novel that he wrote, I think it might have been his debut possibly, or his like one of his earlier works, is the work that he's the most known for. Nothing else that he has written has ever gotten to that level, and he has lived his life, basically, him and his family, off of the dividends of the sales of this book. And there's a moment when the painter says, at least our love was immortalized in art. And while this is happening, there's also conversations around, ancient tombs in Japan and the lives of Japanese aristocracy. And also the painter is contemplating other artworks and using them to think about her own art. And they're all kind of concerned with immortality and what stays. And I think that it's because of those conversations that I found this to be really moving. And there's a way in which this book is also about loneliness. That's all I'm going to say there, because I'm going to talk about it more in my December wrap up. But yeah, I thought it was a really moving read. The next book is a book that I did an individual review for, and I also wrote about it in my newsletter, and that is Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. Now, this is a really provocative book that was banned in the UK and the US, but eventually everyone got their hands on it, and it tells the story of a young author who is living in Paris, making no money, and trying to write a novel. And there's a way in which this book is kind of plotless, but there are some like episodic moments, and the protagonist is contemplating what it means to be an expat and what does it mean to be a writer, but in a way that is really at times quite crass, because there's a lot of really vulgar languages and situations here. But I think that this book was something that was really meaty. It gave me a lot to think about, and I found it to be so applicable to my life and how I think of myself as an artist. And for that reason, there's a way in which I'm like, this book stands the test of time. These conversations about making art and the ways in which culture is dead, and these conversations that happen about God and America, this book really is a lot about what the idea of America are still so prevalent. And that's why this book is one of my best books read, whatever. Okay, after that, we're going to talk about Rejection. Now, I need to buy a copy of Rejection because I read it on my Kindle courtesy of NetGalley, but Rejection is Tony's sophomore novel, and novel/short stories, because this novel is about, 5 or 6 really, really good short stories in kind of an interconnected world. And all of these stories are contemplating, as the title says, rejection. And this book is, I think you can say, an internet novel. It is also very much so, like, so needed and so pertinent to our times and our conversations around identity politics and, you know, contemplating loneliness and what does it mean to be existing in the world. But the writing is incredible. Tony is really a great editor, and each sentence is very exacting and solid, and the stories are very just wild and absurd. You need to read this, check it out, very important. I know this is also a book that so many other booktubers also included in their top 10 books, and I hope that, I know there is a possibility that sometimes when everyone's raving about a book, you're going to pick it up and it won't meet your expectations, but I really hope this book does, because it's a good one. Next up, I'm going to talk about Rhine Journey by Schlee, and as I think I mentioned earlier in this video, this book is also another one of those books that really delves on that question about what constitutes a life well led, because when we're first introduced to our narrator, she is at a crossroads. Her name is Charlotte. She's on vacation with her brother, sister-in-law, and niece, and they're on like this cruise trip exploring Germany, and she's been given a lot of money from her former employer who just died, and now she could either live with her brother, but if she were to do so, she would basically be their maid, or she could live on her own. Like, that's a possibility. And she's kind of grappling with this question, and while this question is weighing on her mind, she also comes across a man who brings to life a character from her past, a former flame, the man she thought she was going to marry, but unfortunately didn't. And there is a way that this book is quite constrained. It was written in the 80s, but it does feel very believable as a sort of historical fiction, and it's very psychological. She is moving about this life, but also there are moments when she's having a conversation with like in a dreamland, in this imaginary conversation with the man that she saw, and it's quite moving, and you're just really like looking at the ways in which family and cultural expectations can really keep a woman playing small, and the narrator is trying to grapple with all of this. Like, that's a lot to be pigeonholed into this one small box, and yeah, it was really just quite a touching read in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Run River by Joan Didion, and Run River is Joan Didion's debut novel. I did an individual book video about this, and then I also spoke about it in my newsletter because I loved this book. This book at times is quite boring, but it is very atmospheric, and there is a way in which, because of this book, I read 2 sort of biographies on Joan Didion, and they helped further inform my reading of this book. And there's a way in which, though this book is about California, it is also a Southern Gothic, which is quite an unusual thing that Joan Didion has done. But this book is looking at Lily, who is a child of frontiersmen who have like beautiful land in California. She's married a man she's known from childhood, and they've had 2 kids, but there's a way in which their marriage is not really that solid, but they sort of are, but not. I don't know. But this book is really contemplating the ways in which California and America is changing, and this sort of like lifestyle that's no longer possible. And there's a way in which this book is also really just about sex and power and desire and sort of a woman's agency. And what was also really compelling about this book, for me at least, was the way in which the fashion is described. There's a way in which there's a real attention to detail, and what is it that Lily is wearing at one point she goes to, I can't tell you why, she's coming back from San Francisco, and she's wearing like this silk suit and a 2-piece suit, a skirt and a top, and they kind of get stained on her journey, and that's like something we're returning to. This outfit is wrinkled, and then there's a way in which her sister-in-law has bought this really extravagant dress with all these butterflies in it, and then that once again becomes important later on. And I just thought that this was something that was quite accomplished for a debut novel, though I don't think it is something that is considered her best work. It is, on the sentence level, so fascinating. But not very well plotted per se. Like, we start with this inciting incident and then we go back in time and then we're moving towards this moment and seeing the different perspectives of the main characters here, Lily, her husband Everett, Ryder Channing, and the sister-in-law. So yeah, that was that book. Okay, the next book we're going to talk about, my number one book almost, if you would, is a very slim book. That is The Stepdaughter by Caroline Blackwood, and this book is very just crisp sentences that are very layered and almost sarcastic and witty. Our narrator is a woman whose husband has left her in a beautiful New York City apartment with her stepdaughter and her child. And she is falling apart because her marriage has just fallen apart, and doesn't want to leave the apartment, and she's really mad and super angry and kind of pathetic. And she is writing these letters in her head, complaining about her situation and really just trying to get the stepdaughter out of her house, but also being like, how am I going to live now? And there's a way in which the observations the protagonist is having, where she's basically just like, I am pathetic, that like realization is done so beautifully. I think it really spoke to me. And yeah, hopefully you check out some of these books if you're interested. That's my year of reading, my 2024 year of reading. I hope you had a good year of reading. I would love to know what were your best reads. I would also like to know what were your worst reads. I was thinking of maybe writing a newsletter about some of my worst reads instead of doing a YouTube video about them, but let me know if that would be of interest. And I really do want to hear from you what your best reads were, and if you have any recommendations for me, and for the other people who are reading the comments. With that, I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.